and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and today we're headed to the Pacific Northwest. That's right, I'm talking to Wendy Wagner, author of Girl in the Creek, which comes out with Toward Nightfire on July 15th, which is next week. And if you don't know about this novel, you just need to take one look at the cover, and that's all that you'll need to know. You'll see a pale girl floating in a creek covered in mushrooms. And yeah, that's all that you need to know going into this novel. Me and Wendy talk about ecological horror, the special kind of dread that comes with that, everything that can go wrong in the woods, and the weird kind of confrontations that Wendy faces when writing the story, the personal nature of this story for her, her inspiration, small town crime, the convergence of crime and horror, and all kinds of other wonderful topics such as that. Wendy is an incredibly enthusiastic guest, and I am so fortunate for her time, her consideration, and just how present she is in her answers. It's a really lovely hour getting to chat with her, and I hope that you all enjoy our conversation as much as I did. And now with that being said, I'm going to shut my trap and I'm going to let you all enjoy the conversation. Thanks, guys. Hi, Wendy. How are you?
So great. It's a totally beautiful summer day today, so I'm just full of joy.
I am living for your background. For obviously people can't see it, but it's very sunny. It's very beautiful. It's very green, and I am jealous because it is rainy here in Louisiana.
Oh man.
Oh, but I am really excited to talk to you today, Wendy. I've kind of like had your name like in the back of my head as a horror reader for the last few years. But I got my hands on Girl in the Creek, which is really exciting, which is your book that's coming out this month from Tor Nightfire. But if people don't know who you are, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Wendy N. Wagner. I'm probably best known as the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine, which is like a critically acclaimed publisher of short horror fiction and short essays. We've had work be nominated for oh gosh, pretty much every award in the like American pantheon of awards, like from the Nebula, the Hugo, all the way down to, the Eugene Foster Award. Um, and on top of that, I am also a writer. Girl in the Creek is my fifth novel that's coming out. I've also, so like my previous horror works include the it's called The Deer Kings, and then I had a novella called The Secret Skin. And I
Wow.
live in on the edge of Portland, Oregon, which is a great place to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had The Deer Kings recommended to me numerous times. I need to make my way to that book. And especially after reading Girl in the Creek, I really want to get my hands on it. But before we move on to talking about Girl in the Creek specifically, I want to talk to you a little bit about your editorial experience and how being an editor-in-chief for a magazine like Nightmare Magazine has kind of influenced your writing. Or like if it has, how has it? Kind of the give and take that that position has with your creativity.
Awesome question. So I have been working like my day job has been editing for about the last 11 years. I worked as a senior editor at Nightmare up until 2021. And I'm also still a senior editor at Lightspeed magazine, where I get to edit really cool science fiction and fantasy writers. And I would say, a lot of people have this conception of editors as being like these mean gatekeepers who just want to like reject your work and judge you. But in actuality, the real job of an editor is more about being like the work's biggest cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I approach editing is I come from this perspective of when I find a story that I love, that I feel like I can do great work with, I try to look at it to see like what the author's deepest intentions for the story are.
Yeah.
So I'm not going through the story being like, I can't wait to find something that's wrong with it. Like that is not how I edit. I just am like, what is the author really trying to do? Does this sentence like do as much as they want it to do? Is a reader going to get that intention? Are there little things you can do to make the work that like the language more exciting, make it do more work? Yeah, so it's more about trying to help you bring your work to like the best way that you would want to do it. And like I always tell people, you're in charge. You are the one that knows what you want the story to do. And so there are two things from that experience that have like really made a difference in my work as a writer. First of all, it's made me be a lot nicer to myself. Like I used to be like way more of like, oh, you made a mistake. You're such a dummy. But now I'm like way less hung up about that kind of thing. And I really do like when I'm editing my work, I try to come at it with the same mindset that I do when I work with my writers. And I think it has not only helped me, make my craft stronger, but it's just helped me like writing even more than ever, which is great. And then the other thing is that I've gotten to work with like world class writers at Lightspeed and Nightmare. Like really some of the best in the business. I've gotten to edit people like Chuck Palahniuk, Stephen Graham Jones. If you're a science fiction reader, I've gotten to work with Elizabeth Bear and Ken Liu and, just people who are, and I would say maybe my biggest influence might be Ray Naylor, who is like a up and coming science fiction writer who I just feel like his precision with words is unbeaten. Anyway, getting to work with those people and just get into like real conversations about why they make the choices they make when they're writing has been really great for me. I've learned a ton, and yeah, I really appreciate everything those writers have shared with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine like that hands-on kind of approach to dealing with story is really, really helpful. And especially like kind of comparing and contrasting short fiction and long fiction, I always feel like authors have such prolific advice when it comes to short fiction. Like, about timing and, landing like the punch when it's needed and brevity and, like all of these different things. I've just heard so much great advice about short fiction. And I know that you've written some short stories as well, so I feel like this is a natural point where I can pick your brain a little bit. Like, how do you feel about writing short fiction versus long fiction, especially like from the editor standpoint of, hey, maybe this maybe needs to be a little bit shorter, or this could be a little bit longer.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's funny. I did an interview with somebody else, and he said, I looked on your website and I counted, and at least according to what you have on your website, you have sold and published 60 short stories. And I was like, wow, I hadn't counted recently. That seems like a lot. Yeah, so I think I really, so I kind of have two different perspectives and feelings about writing short fiction. One is that for me, I feel like I do like as much internal work creating a character and creating a world when I write a short story as I do when I write a novel.
Yeah.
Um, there's more work. Like once you have the world and you have the character, there's like a lot more structural work and like a lot more work like developing things around it in a novel. But just that first like fiery oomph that you have to gather to like be willing to write the project, it takes the same amount of work.
Yeah.
So because I'm the kind of person who tends to get kind of like depressed when I'm not writing, I find like for my emotional well-being, there's like I really appreciate the efficiency of writing novels because it's like, okay, I got the idea and now I can just sit there and work on it every day for like 6 months and I can get my fix, which is, it's efficient and a good use of my time. But I think there is something really magical about a great short story.
Hmm.
The distilled nature of it can sometimes have like more impact somehow than like a whole novel. And so I feel like short stories are a real gift to
Yeah.
a reader and just kind of magical and special. And I think we should try to cultivate more appreciation for them.
No, I agree with you. I don't know what's going on with me this year, but I used to kind of be like I had a hard time with short stories, particularly like collections and anthologies. Like if I was reading back to back to back to like review or cover or whatever, it was just like I had a hard time kind of switching gears constantly, like on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. But whatever, I don't know if I've matured more, my prefrontal cortex has developed more, but I have a true appreciation for a good short story now. And it makes almost reading these longer novels a little bit more difficult because I just get really, really impressed. Like you said, whenever you can initiate that same amount of like oomph, that attention grabber, that home for the story in such a short amount of space, to whereas, sometimes for a novel, it takes some time and they're just two different mediums. It's not saying that one's better than the other, but it's just, I get so impressed when it's shorter.
Yeah, exactly. It's really cool and really fun to like, I don't know, like see the amount of experience that you can pack into just a short space. It's pretty neat.
Absolutely. And then one last question that I have about your editing experience and kind of like your author experience together. What are some of like the best positive qualities and pieces of writing that you look for that like even you've seen kind of come up in your writing that you're like, oh, I'm really glad I learned how to do that, or I picked this up, or this has gotten better over time because of editing?
Well, when I'm at the magazine and I'm reading submissions, the number one thing that I'm looking for is a voice that's just like rich and full and that
Hmm.
is really invested in the story it's going to tell. And that's like the kind of thing that the more submissions you read, the more choosy you get about it. And I think it's something that many writers like when we first start out writing, we don't always like
Hmm.
get the hang of that. Like we're so busy like working hard to be like, what verb did I choose? Like how do I make a simile and stuff like that, that we don't get as fully dialed in with our hearts as maybe we need to. I feel
Hmm.
like for many of us, what happens is we write a story, it starts in a certain place, and like maybe 3 pages later, we've caught up with our story idea. And so like that is you'll see like the advice with short stories like just cut off the whole first scene or get rid of the first 2 pages. And 9 times out of 10, like it's because so many of us like we have to have like a little warm up period.
Yeah.
It's stuff that we as a writer have to think through, but it's not stuff a reader has to feel.
Hmm.
And so yeah, you're usually like safe in the editing process to like get rid of a lot of stuff at the beginning of the story because you were just like, I'm warming up. I'm gonna get ready for the real deal. That's something I think that has helped me a lot in my work, and it's been like I am more likely to do more like playing around writing
Hmm.
when I'm working
Yeah.
on a novel. I'm like not feeling like, oh, I have to write something that is advancing the story. I have to write something that like is going to contribute to the word count. And I'm more willing to be like, well, this is like some free writing that I'm doing where I can explore things about this world or this character or this style of writing. And like, for example, in Girl in the Creek, the very first scene is told from the point of view of a coyote who's part of this like mycelially, I don't think that's the word, this like fungally connected hive mind. And I knew I wanted to write that scene, but I wasn't quite sure how. So I went ahead and I wrote to practice a whole different short story that's told from the perspective of a dog who has like a computer chip in her head. So she can like start using and understanding language. That way I could like play around with like thinking about questions like how do dogs think? Like what are the difference between the dog senses and my senses? How would that influence her perspective on the world and things like that? And so that could have just been, I think like past me would have been like, oh, I've just wasted all this time by writing a short story, like just to practice one, for one scene in my novel. but I feel like it was like really good work and helpful. And then I sold the story, so that helped.
Yeah, no, that does help. But I do think that's very much like the kind of approach to creativity that I think I'm hoping to adapt into my life. Like even as like I paint every now and then and like I'm trying to like be a little bit more graceful with my painting. It's like the Bob Ross philosophy of like there's no mistakes, there's only happy accidents. And it
Yeah.
sounds kind of lofty and out there, but I do think it's true that sometimes like you just got to get it out there, whether it's wrong or it doesn't fit this time around or it needs workshopping. I think there is something really cathartic about just getting whatever it is out and then going from there. So I really do like that you kind of pick up on that and like see the importance in that and like the kindness in that, because I do think we are our own worst critics when it comes to that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, and especially too like the thing that you mentioned about having such a strong, unique voice. It feels like when as a reader, sometimes whenever I'm reading things, I pick up on that and I don't really know what to call it, but it's almost like a conviction or I don't know. I don't know if it's a confidence, a conviction or a voice thing, but I definitely know what you're talking about. It's such a unique quality that pieces of writing possess.
Yeah, exactly. It makes the work speak to the human inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it
And
moves you.
that's,
It's the soul stirring thing.
yeah, and we need that, right?
We definitely do. We definitely do. And speaking of, we're going to move on to talking about your novel now and the soul stirring in that with Girl in the Creek. If you want to go ahead, I'm going to let you introduce the synopsis for the novel because I don't want to accidentally spoil it, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, Girl in the Creek is about a woman named Erin Harper who really wants to write a true crime project that's about people who have gone missing in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest, which is a place that her brother disappeared into 5 years before the story starts. And so she gathers up a group of outdoorsy friends and they set out to do research in a small town on the edge of this forest. And the whole trip turns upside down when they discover the body of a dead young woman in a creek. And there are two very special things about this dead body. One is that it has mushrooms growing on it that not even the local mycology expert can identify. And two, it promptly goes missing from the morgue, and the dead girl's fingerprints show up at a new crime scene. So just suddenly there's a lot of connections between a lot of weird things that are going on in this town and this dead girl, and our plucky heroine has to figure out what the heck is going on.
I love that setup. There's so much that I love about the setup of Girl in the Creek about, kind of the small townness of it, the missing, there's obviously like kind of the crime mystery element of it of the missing folks. There's obviously personal investment for Aaron, our main character, which is how we're viewing this whole story, and all of these different components, and they all kind of blend together to make this really incredible story. Can you speak like to when you first knew that you wanted to write this story and like kind of how this came to be? Because there are so many moving parts, so I'm kind of curious like what the inspiration for each part of the story is.
Sure. Well, it was a slowly evolving project that went through a couple of different iterations before I finally settled on this particular format. I had taken, we were in lockdown during pandemic and we weren't allowed to leave our county. And I went on a drive along the Clackamas River, which is the river that flows near my home. And we were like passing through a lot of interesting, small, odd communities and seeing like a lot of just incredible natural beauty. And we stopped at like a little picnic area where the scene that happens at the beginning of chapter 2
Hmm.
uh, unfolded, which was just like standing there looking at a river and like seeing a bird. But I just felt like it was super incredibly beautiful moment. And I just knew I wanted to capture like the beauty and history of this place that to me is extremely special. I mean, its backstory, I think, is similar to many places in the United States where you have a place of incredible natural beauty that then also has a history, a very difficult history, like both socially and like economically, where there have been like uh, a lot of extraction industries that have caused like a lot of harm to the landscape, but then also like economic crashes that have caused a lot of harm to people. And there have definitely been a lot of winners and losers socially. And now we're trying to like figure out what to do and how to help these towns like thrive
Hmm.
or even just survive. So I knew I wanted to write about that. And I knew that whoever this person, like I came home after that drive and I just wrote down that scene without some of the like it's a horror story kind of elements. And I was like, I like this character. I feel like she's got some kind of deep sadness and I want to tell a story. And it took a long time of just sort of like poking at that concept and coming back to it and trying to figure out who this person was, what their motives were, things like that. And I like wrote like probably 40,000 words of, oh, and knew I wanted this book to have something to do with mushrooms. Like those were the things that I knew. Like it needed to be on the Clackamas River and have some kind of creepy mushroom story. And I had taken it in a whole different, much more gothic direction. And I wrote like 40,000 word book. And then Sylvia Moreno Garcia's book, Mexican Gothic, came out. And I was like, well, I think the Gothic mushroom has been covered. So I'm just going to throw this out and start over again. But that was okay because I was like not totally sold on like that, the way the story was going. Yeah, so I just kind of kept poking around until I came up with something. And I also like one of the things that I did is I just had like I wound up writing all of the human-centered elements just like in one very quick burst.
Hmm.
But I knew like for me, a huge thing that I am interested in doing with my is exploring philosophical concepts and like trying to look at like different kinds of minds and how different kinds of beings think about the world and
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't want to write a book that was just like an exciting adventure with like people in the woods. And so then I got the idea of telling alternating between two different points of view characters. And that was when like I've created this mushroom monster in my book. What if we had, what if it had a chance to like narrate some chapters? I feel like that would be really fun. And I did, and I love those chapters the best. Wish it had its own book, just telling its own story, but I'm glad I think it works out really well as a combination.
Oh no, absolutely. And I could like definitely see an origin story novella kind of like accompanying this, like
That's
knowing what I know
great.
having read the book. But to kind of talk a little bit about the mushroom aspect in general for this story. I have to say like the idea of spore, like the that specific kind of brand of horror that we're kind of all really having a fascination with right now is really colliding with like ecological horror, in general. And I think a lot of it has to do with like The Last of Us. The Last of Us has been huge. What like was that kind of in the forefront of your mind whenever you started this story? Because I feel like there's so many different ways that you can take this very simple idea of, fungi and just kind of blow it up because it is its own world. It is its own operating system. It is its own king, it's its own thing. So the creativity bursts from that quite literally. So,
Yeah, well, so my interest in mushrooms goes back and fungi goes back to the fact that I've lived in the Pacific Northwest like my whole life.
yeah.
And like I grew up on the Oregon coast where it is technically a rainforest. Like we would get like 90 inches of rain a year. And we lived in a really terrible rental house that in the winter, like mushrooms would spring up out of the carpet in the bedroom.
Yeah.
It was just kind of this omnipresent entity that was both appealing and unsettling. And like growing up with mushrooms being a constant presence, they've always been really interesting to me. And having those mixed feelings, like I can remember, um, we lived the first 5 years of my life, we lived in the dry half of
Hmm.
like Washington and Oregon, both having like a desert side and a water side, right?
Right.
And so the first time, like when we first moved to the wet side of Oregon, I just remember on the back side of the shed, it was all covered with this like crenellated fungal growth. And then along the roof line, there were just all these paper wasps. And they like flew at me. And the combination of the two things, I cannot overstate like how terrifying it
No,
was,
yeah.
like as a 5-year-old, and like confusing the two things, like and mixing them together. So there was like, on one hand, there's like this deep terror that I had of like different kinds of mushrooms and like a deep, it was also representative of this like deeply unhappy time when my family was very poor and really struggling and going through like really tough stuff. So I had like a lot of dark feelings about fungus.
Yeah.
But then combined with the fact that like I love nature, I love going hiking, and like the more I learned about ecology and like really understanding the role that fungus plays in our forests, in our planet, um, there are a couple of really great writers who have written about like the roles of mushrooms in
Hmm.
like our ecospheres, and like as I've studied about ecology and things like that, like they became important to me. And so I think I just really wanted to capture those two like head-butting things
Yeah.
of it can be terrifying, but it's so necessary and important. And as we're learning today, like different relationships between plants and fungus is actually like how forests are held together. And it's like without it, forests would all die and we would die with them.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's
a
kind of like at the heart of where this came from. Also, another two just fun factors are back in the long ago era when I first started writing, it was a time when zombie fiction was huge. And this is like, from the birthplace of The Last of Us, because everybody was talking about, the cordyceps mushroom that takes holds in ants and like has, mind control powers and things like that. And it was just such a huge hot topic. I think it must have left a big imprint on me.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you bring up kind of that balance or your examination of like your really strong feelings of feeling like connected with nature and then also like the younger Wendy's childhood terror of that memory and that, everything associated with it. Because it is a balance thing in nature, right? And like that's like part of the whole thing of ecological horror is like disrupting the balance. We're taking more than we're giving, that whole thing. So I think it's really interesting that you bring up kind of addressing those feelings within yourself through this novel. And then even more so, I mean, like I just read One Yellow Eye. I'm forgetting the author's name right now. It's another novel that's coming out this month and it's another zombie novel and it talks about this virus making the jump from one species to another. So I guess I'm in my nature horror era right
Yay!
now, but there is something uniquely horrifying about hey, this hasn't quite made that jump yet from this species to this, but it could happen. It could, it's very terrifying.
Yes, so scary.
Absolutely. And so moving on a little bit, the other thing that you balance with, like this ecological component of horror is the crime of the story. There are missing people. There's missing women. Aaron has a brother that's missing. We find out that it's more than just women that are missing as the story progresses. And there's kind of like that true crime component plus the investigative component of the story, right? I think we're having like an interesting moment. I find horror has been interrogating our relationship with true crime lately like what's up with our weird fascination with true crime and I think it's so interesting and I think Erin kind of contends with that a little bit. Would you agree that she's kind of evaluating her own role with like reporting true crime and her personal investment in finding her brother?
Yeah, I think I didn't really like set out to like interrogate a whole nother genre of fiction. I was just like, yes, I'm gonna really write a horror story. But like as I was writing, it seemed like Erin is a person who is, by and large a good person who cares about people. And yet she has these moments where she realizes like she's learning about something horrible. And instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, she's thinking like, oh, this is gonna be so awesome in my book. Which I feel like when you are a writer, you have those moments where you're like, oh man, Uncle Paul, it sure is sad that, he has cancer, but boy, I really gotta tap into like his story about what happened to him at chemo. Like that's writing gold. Um, so I think there is just in general a tension in being a writer, in like having that understanding that like you can't help but like recognize when something is going to be amazing when you write it down, but it kind of can seem ghoulish to us sometimes when we're like preying on it can kind of feel like we're preying on like terrible things in the world. Um, I think a great companion read for this is a book I haven't read yet. I've only read an interview with the writer, but friends have been reaching out to tell me about it. A book that's just come out this summer is called Murderland by Carolyn
Yes, I
Fraser.
just picked up a
Uh,
copy last
so,
week.
you know, growing up in the Pacific Northwest in the 1980s and 1990s, I cannot overstate like the intense awareness that we grew up with of like serial killers and things like that. As a like really little kid, we lived near Spokane, Washington, and there was a newscaster named Shelley Monahan, and I was so smitten with her. I would like the news would come on and I would see Shelley Monahan and I would just be like, Shelley Monahan, she's amazing. I bet she's so nice. She's so pretty. She's so wonderful. And like there was this huge news story because she was attacked by like there was a serial sexual assaulter in the area who attacked her and she actually like wound up, providing a lot of great evidence that helped catch this guy. And I did not understand what happened to her because I was like 4.
Yeah.
But I knew something terrible had happened to Shelley, and it was linked to something that had happened over and over and over again and been like really terrifying to our community. And then like we moved to Oregon, and my sister would be like, we live 25 miles from the nearest town, and she would drive to and from school, and she would work late after school at the Dairy Queen. And I just remember her having conversations with my mom about how scared she was because like at that time, about 70 miles away, the Santiam killer had been active and he was targeting girls that like really looked a lot like her. And so just all of that kind of stuff and like hearing about the Green River killer and there was
Mhm.
just so much of this going on. And I just feel like, we live we've sort of swung out of like there was a time period where people could say nothing bad about Portland and Oregon, like, oh, it's a paradise, it's so beautiful, the food's so great. Like there was no limit to the good things people were saying. And I was like, yeah, but there's like this whole history of like, yikes. And I wanted to kind of wrestle with that in this book.
No, that makes so much sense now that you say it. And I'm kind of kicking myself for not thinking about it whenever I read it, but that's so true. Yeah, I can't imagine the impact of like hearing those stories, like you said, like just so offhandedly as a child about this is and they're gruesome, they're so barbaric, they're so extreme, right? And
Yeah.
that's why we still have a fixation on them today, whether it's right or it's wrong or whatever you want to call it. And I do tend to think that creative folks, whether they're writers or artists, we are, I think, a little bit more attuned and attentive, I think is our problem, which is a blessing and a curse. So when we latch on to something, we can't unknow what we know. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do with that information?
Yes.
There's, of course, ethical questions with all of that. But I definitely understand what you're saying, especially with Erin's character and her wanting to write this book and get to the root of things, but still picking up on that information of like, oh, people would like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
complex thing. Yeah. So, and then the other part, of this is they are trying to solve the crime. They are trying to solve what's going on. How do you approach writing crime fiction? Because as a reader, I've like really got my start with like crime thrillers, like procedurals. And to me, they seem so freaking logical, like A to B to C and but then I got into horror and I was like, oh, all bets are off. We can do whatever. This is great. So I'm always really, really like interested how authors who kind of balance both the genres do it because to me they seem on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to planning or writing.
Well, I gotta say, I totally agree with you. I have no idea how to write a real thriller or a real crime novel. Like those people, like they must have such special brains.
I
Like
think that they have a
I
big,
don't
big
know how they do
whiteboard.
it.
There's lots of whiteboards and pens and different
Yeah.
colors.
I mean, yeah, I would love to write a real crime novel because like you, I have read a lot of them and I find it to be like such an engaging, really exciting, fun thing to read in part because like I love a puzzle. I love seeing how things piece together and yeah, I don't think that's in my skill set yet. This is definitely a horror novel where it's like it is not about very carefully piecing together things. It is about having a really good time getting scared in the woods.
Absolutely. But you do. I think you need to give yourself some credit. There is a mystery component to it, and there is I think there was points at which I thought I know who quote unquote did it, and then I was
Oh,
wrong.
right.
So I think
Yay!
you're a little bit farther ahead on that than you think.
Oh, that is a really, thank you. That is reassuring to hear.
No, I totally get what you mean though. I mean, I really do love horror for that reason and that you can just kind of experiment and express and go wherever you want to go and explore what you want to explore with not as many logical bounds, right? And
Yeah,
especially with Girl in the Creek, you created this thing called the strangeness. And I think it's one of the coolest things that I've ever read. The way that you introduced it and the way that it moves, I just think it's really, really unique. How did you land on the depiction of the strangeness? Because, like you mentioned, that exercise of you writing the other story about the dog with the microchip, it's such a unique way that you deliver the information on the strangeness. So I'm wondering what the very beginning of that looked like for you and how you decided to share that.
sure. Well, when I came up with the idea that we were going to have like we were going to have like a bunch of different kinds of characters that were part of a hive mind, but also like were still themselves. And I knew I wanted to try to capture like what was unique about the entity. There's animals and people, so it's hard to pick the right word. We'll call them all people because animals are people too, right?
Yeah.
So you have people and they have a certain kind of mind before they get involved with this mushroom thing. And I wanted to make sure that could shine through because I guess maybe kind of in touch with the whole like interrogation of like the true crime elements is like I think it is it's so like we spend so much time like focusing on predators that like victims' stories vanish into the background and I these people are not uh they're not crime victims, but they have been taken against their will into like a different kind of living. And so I wanted to try to give them their voices as best I could, despite the fact that the strangeness sometimes doesn't allow them to have voices. Um, so that was like a big part of creating each section is like trying to think of like, well, what would this person be like? And how would their voice shine through if they could tell their story? But then also trying to capture the fact that they're being subsumed into this larger networked thing. And that part was really fun. It was really fun to try to think of like if I was an entity that was made up of different kinds of minds, what would it mean like to have a perspective on a particular event and try to think of like different ways that information would come to it? Like I think there's a scene that like we kind of start to get a vision of like, here's what this scene is like from the point of view of this man who's part of the strangeness. Here's what it looks like from a chipmunk, and chipmunk's eyes are different from ours. Here's the information that the entity would get from a fern, like what does information even mean to like a fern? And it was really fun to try to put that together while still also trying to envision what was the agenda of this other
Yeah.
creature that is so very alien that we can't understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the most like really visceral or like really imaginative pieces of writing that came from the novel were in those explanations of like those perspective changes, right? And I think it's such a cool thing because it's not something that easily pops into your mind sometimes. It's like, oh, well, what would this look like to the dog next door, you know? So I
Yeah.
think it was very fun to have that shift along the way. And I think also it's really interesting Erin rolls into town with all these different people, right? And some of the or people that she kind of gets to know that are already there, and there's new people that come in as well. And that's kind of the small town nature of this, right? Like the outsiders coming in. But it's a little ironic whenever you find out what's been going on, and I don't want to say because I don't want to spoil. But there is something that works really well with horror in small towns, just in general.
Yeah.
Can you speak as to why you think that just works so well 9 times out of 10?
Well, first of all, I grew up in a small town, so I know, like, yeah, there's definitely like small towns kind of acquire their own identities because they have these like distinct borders that contain people and also like this small many small towns, but definitely the small town that I grew up in and the small town that Erin stumbles into, it's not just a small town, but it's a remote small town, right? Like it's a long way from any other small town. And that feeling of being isolated, I think, is really irresistible to play with when you're a horror writer. Like it's so fun to like cut people off from the larger world and like force them to deal with the consequences. Because I think like in a when we're cut off like that, all of our strengths and weaknesses are really like they really show. And that's why I think it's irresistible in a film. Like that's kind of the concept for the human side of the story was like, could I write a book that felt like, a horror movie? And and so that I wanted to kind of play with some of the classic tropes. I've heard like some people have re hit. I actually like when I was revising the book, like going through and doing copy edits, I was like, man, this group really kind of feels like the mystery gang
Yeah.
from Scooby-Doo. And I was like, I think that must have been intentional. Like some part of my brain was like, all right, who's the proto? Like when I was a kid, I loved Scooby-Doo. So I think like I was drawing on that trope. And I think a lot of other horror writers, horror like filmmakers in particular, have caught on to that as well as being a fun thing. But yeah, so that was just part of it is I wanted to play around with like classic horror tropes of being cut off and isolated. But also it's hard for me to write things that aren't about small towns because
Yeah.
growing up in a small town, it left a big imprint on me.
Yeah, that's what you know. And I think it's a really great parallel to set the story the way that you do, given what we learn about the strangeness and what's at play. I think it's just really smart. And to your point about kind of like I felt like Girl in the Creek gave, and I haven't watched it all the way through yet, but very Twin Peaks vibes, very like X-Files vibes. So that was very much the monster of the week is mushrooms, I guess. For
Yes. Oh, I love that.
So no, I totally understand what you were going for with that. And kind of to boot with that, you said, how fascinated you've been with wildlife, with nature, with mushrooms in particular, but did you have to do any additional research for this novel? And if so, did it change the trajectory of the story at all for you doing the research? Because it's a very well-informed novel. There's a lot of technical terms about mushrooms that I did not know before reading, and I'm very impressed.
Well, the way the backstory of this book is that the Dear Kings came out from a small press, and it was sort of like a little bit of a sad journey in which I could not find like an agent or a publisher to take it on. And I really loved that book. And it was kind of heartbreaking. And so when it came time to write another novel, I was like, I am not even going to try to find an agent or a big publisher. I am just going to like write a book that is about everything that I love. And it's just going to be for me. I don't even care. And
I love
so
that.
like, I am like I really love reading nonfiction.
Hmm.
So like I had devoured um Merlin Sheldrake has this amazing book called Entangled Life that is about mushrooms and fungi of all kind. Paul Stamets has a lot of stuff about that. So I'd read all of those. And another book that I had recently read right before writing this it's by Franz de Waal. It's called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And I'd like taken a class on permaculture and just gotten really into native plant propagation and plant and gardening and native plant gardening. Um, and like with I had like what I did with my like pandemic check was I bought a bunch of like gear so I could go backpacking. So it was just like I'm just like unloading like everything I had like learned in like the 2 or 3 years before I started writing to like smoosh into this book. And yeah, so I did double check a lot of my terms, like, am I remembering this? But mostly it was just like, here's my chance to make everybody else learn about all the things I've been learning about,
I love
which I
that so
thought would only
much.
appeal to a certain subsect of really weird geeks. And then, yeah, somehow I also got a new agent and it got picked up by Tor Nightfire. So I guess there goes to show that there are more nerds out there than I thought there were.
I love that. I love that so much. No, it really is interesting though, and I think that I feel like a lot of people came out the pandemic with really niche interests and knowledge on certain things. So I do love that you were able to channel that into your writing and like write the book for you. I really do love that Girl in the Creek is that book. And there's kind of a flip side though, I think, to writing about ecological horror in 2025 because look at the world around us. There's natural disasters happening all the time. Does it feel like how does it feel to write ecological horror in this day and age? Like, do you scare yourself ever? Is it like dread inducing? Is it cathartic? Like, what's that experience like?
Um, Gosh, that's a complicated question. I mean, first of all, like, uh, one thing that I think is worth mentioning in Girl in the Creek, which I had originally, I originally sold it at the very end of 2022.
Hmm.
And so like the 5 years before the book was fit, like that's referred to, like the time span at which Brian, Aaron's brother, vanished. Like that would have been in 2017, which for me
Right.
was a year that I was incredibly depressed. Just the things that were happening that our government was like doing, especially in the environment, like to the national forests and our
Yeah.
public lands, and just the complete uh, unconcern and unwillingness to do anything to protect the natural world that we depend on for life, like that, I became so depressed that like it was like a struggle to get out of bed every day. I feel
Yeah.
like the Brian, Aaron's brother, he is presumed to have committed suicide because he is so depressed about the state of the world. And I feel like Brian was speaking for me in that way. And what got me through that period was I found a video game called Until Dawn, and we started
Yeah.
playing it. And it was like so exciting and so fun and so scary that it like jolted me back to life. And after that, I just, I've become like this, like, I'm surprised I'm not like knocking on people's door. Like, do you have time to hear about, for a word about our Lord and Savior? Like the horror genre, it can do so many good things for you. It can help you like just, it can be a distraction. It can be a coping tool. It can be a way to practice dealing with terrible things. It can be a realm where you can go into it and like you can kind of practice being the strong person, or you can practice being the person that's like dangerous and violent and things like that. So I think we've now come kind of full circle. We are now back to, I mean, we didn't make very good headway in the interim, but at least we were paying lip service to the fact that climate change was real and that are facing like the utter destruction of our way of life as we know it and possibly our existence on this very planet. And so I just am really, really going out there and trying to put horror out in the world where I take the things that I'm afraid of and I turn them into things that I hope can help other people deal with their own bad feelings.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think like that's what I want to do. And I feel like incredibly grateful that I'm getting to publish this book right now. I just went to the American Library
Yeah.
Association's conference and we did a panel on climate fiction. And afterward, I had two different amazing experiences. One, a guy came up to me and he said, I'm rethinking everything I thought I knew about horror. And then someone came up to me and said, how can I get more involved in environmental activism? And I was like, these are the two things I want to do with my life, and this book is doing it for me. So I just want to get out there and share these good words.
No, I totally understand that. And I relate to the sentiment about, caring so much. I'm from Louisiana. I mean, we have coastal erosion like nobody's business. We are losing property, I mean, like by the football field every day. There are parts that of my childhood that we used to go spend that are no longer there. I mean,
Wow.
it's, where we face it every day. And so I very much relate to that strong connection of like, this is happening. This is incredibly sad. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people care or like, we don't know what to do about it, like how, like, where do you go? And I think that's such a powerful emotion to be able to channel in your writing. And I'm so glad that you had those experiences at that conference because truly, like, what better reception could you ask for, Like that is it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was, yeah, truly amazing experience.
Yeah, it's a very passionate thing to feel that way and to channel it into your art that way. But I think that's to me that's why we do all of this, right? Like, because whenever I read your stuff or I read somebody else's when it's something that I care about, it's one less connection. We feel a little less alone in this world. And God, we need to
Yes.
not feel alone right now. So
Yes, yes. It's
yeah.
so, I just want to go out and hug everyone.
I
I feel like
know.
everyone needs it.
I totally agree. And I think, a lot of that emotionality that you speak of really comes out with Erin and her emotions about her brother and, her relationship with her brother. And, for a novel, we've talked about how scary it is with the ecological side of it, how, dreadful it is, how strange it is, how X-Files-y it is, but it's also very emotional. And so how do you kind of tap in? You just tap into a lot of corners with this book. So how is it to tap into the emotional side of this for Erin?
Well, one thing that kind of informed the writing of this book is in 2020, my dad had two strokes.
Hmm.
And while he was in the hospital recovering from them, he was diagnosed with diabetes and also lymphoma.
Oh
And he
man.
was given, he had decided he didn't want to try to treat his cancer and he was just going to let it play out. And so we were kind of in this like slow moving grief
Yeah.
spiral for several years, like watching it all unfold. And so I think that gave, obviously, this book was written early on in that experience, but it definitely, I think, starting to just deal with ideas about like losing the people you care about.
Hmm.
That was definitely, informed the writing quite a bit.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to wrestle with, especially in a manner like that. That's rough. But you feel it with Erin. You feel her grappling and like kind of, you implement these flashbacks where she remembers the happy things with Brian and she also equally remembers the rough things with Brian. And I feel like that's very, very true to grief or, dealing with any kind of emotional trauma in the present is you kind of get both sides, even though you only, on the days you really don't want that bad side, you still get it. And that just
Yeah.
feels very real for, in general and for Erin. But enough about the heavy stuff. There's one last thing I want to talk to you about this novel, and then we'll wrap things up. But the way that you ended this book, I absolutely adore. I love that you left it the way that you did. Were you always going to do that? And I'm not going to say what it is, obviously, because it's fun. But were you
Uh,
always
you
going to do
know,
that, or did you
the
just?
original ending of the book was like when I wrote the first draft and I had just written just the human side of that story. He ended in a way more like, golly gee, yay, we won kind of way. And then I wrote all the scenes from the perspective of the strangeness. And I got to the end and I was like, that's not the end.
Yeah.
That's not the lesson that we need from this book. Um, and I don't think necessarily that humanity as we know it is the hero we need right now.
I understand. No, I love that. I love what you did with it. I love the way that you set it up. It was very satisfying for me as a reader. So
Yay.
very, very happy about that. But as a whole, thank you so much for answering my questions about Girl in the Creek. I love that we were able to do this deep dive because, like I said, I just feel like you balanced and kind of confronted so many different angles of horror with this novel and, a little bit of crime fiction as well. So I really just wanted to dive in and, get into the meat and potatoes of it. But moving on to the big picture of 2025, what does the rest of the year look like for you? Obviously, the book's released, but do you have anything else coming out, going on?
Oh gosh, I wish I had something coming out. I have a couple of books that are just sort of in like publishing purgatory as the like things are moving very slowly, it seems like, and publishers are taking their own sweet time making
Yeah.
decisions. And it's like, could you please decide faster? That would be great. But in the meantime, I am excited that after getting done with all the book related events that are coming out this month and in August, I can maybe like get back to focusing on my own writing a little bit more, but also just get back really focusing on Nightmare and making sure we have lots of great stories coming out for our readers.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm gonna keep my eyes out for Nightmare and what else to come from there. And so is there anything that you working on or any ideas that you're currently working on that you are at liberty to discuss? I like to ask authors this, but I know that there's a lot of red tape with what y'all are allowed to talk about, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble.
Aw, well, I'm just outlining my next novel. It has a lot of different ideas, but I will say I is inspired by the fact that I spent 7 years working at the Portland Children's Museum, which occupied a space that had been a natural history museum before that. Yeah, so it's sort of about maybe our places that have relationships with very complicated relationships with their past and people who have complicated relationships with their past. So hopefully it works out.
That sounds very, very interesting. I'm all in on that. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, any like topics that we didn't discuss that you want to discuss before we wrap things up?
I can't think of anything.
I always like to throw that out there just in case. But yeah, no, this was a super deep dive into Girl in the Creek, and I don't think that we spoiled anything, which is really, really important. And I'm really excited for readers to get their hands on this. I think it's an equally fun read. I think it's an equally important read, and I think it's an equally somber read whenever you view it in the right light. I really, really enjoyed my time reading the book and getting to talk with you about it. It comes out on July 15th, correct, with Tor
That's
Nightfire?
right. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Well, that is a week away. On Tuesday, it'll
Yeah.
be a week away. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
very soon. Are you nervous? Are you feeling like what's your
Yes.
feelings?
Nervous, excited, a whole lot of feelings.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thank you so much again, Wendy. This has been absolutely lovely. And again, one more time, Girl in the Creek comes out on July 15th with Tor Nightfire. Everybody should go pick it up. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Literally anytime. Come back anytime.
Thank you.
Once again, just a huge thank you to Wendy for her time, her kindness, her passion. Getting to talk to authors like Wendy who are so passionate about what they do, whether it's editing, it's writing, reading, just being involved in the storytelling process is such a delight. And you can just tell coming across the mic whenever you talk to her how much she cares about story and the themes and topics that she writes about in her books and that she, sees whenever she's editing other stories. It's a really cool thing to just be around this many passionate people. And speaking of passionate people, next week I will have Stephen Graham Jones on the podcast. I will be sharing our conversation about Killer on the Road, Babysitter Lives, and just a few general topics about his work as a whole, followed by the one and only Paul Tremblay the week after that. So yeah, you could say it's a pretty big time here on the podcast for little old me. It's a little bit of a pinch me moment to be sharing these conversations, these interviews with you guys, but I'm just so fortunate that I've had the opportunity to do so and that you guys are interested in listening to these conversations as well. And so on that note, thank you all once again for liking, sharing, subscribing, rating, reviewing, all that good stuff. And if I could impart one thing to you, it would be to go out next week and pick up Girl in the Creek by Wendy Wagner. I think that if you're a fan of murder mysteries or thrillers, this might be a good book to reach across the aisle and see what the horror genre is all about. There's a lot of central ideology and inner workings that are related to the thriller genre or the mystery genre that I think Wendy definitely picks up on with these small town mystery vibes. It definitely ventures into horror territory, but if you've ever been curious about the horror genre, I think this would be a great gateway book to explore the genre and see what it's all about. Like I said one last time, Girl in the Creek is out on July 15th from Tor Nightfire. The next 2 weeks I have Stephen Graham Jones and Paul Tremblay. And yeah, what a time to be a horror fan. I always end on this sentiment, but it's just so freaking true. Love you guys. Look after one another. Be kind. And until next week.